Is this on? Yep, it's on. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's that time of year. It's fall and time for pumpkin pie, but also the five-year forecast. So it's wonderful to get together with our counterparts, with the council and the school board. We're so delighted to be with you, and also to hear from our magnificent staffs on what we can look forward to in the next 5 years. So I need to read this little thing. In accordance with the Virginia Beach Code, Section 2-21, and by the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Virginia Beach, I hereby call for a special formal session of the Virginia Beach City Council, Tuesday, November 18th, 2025, at 12 o'clock p.m., Building 19, Municipal Center, 2416 Courthouse Drive, Virginia Beach, Virginia. The purpose of this special formal session is to allow the City Council and School Board joint session to receive the five-year forecast presentation. Wanted to say that the mayor will be here. He had to open up this big thing at Regent University, and Ms. Henley will be here at 2:15, and Mr. Bellucci will not be here today. And I'll let our wonderful chairlady from the school board announce her people that couldn't be here.
Sure, thank you. Vice Chair Weems is out for medical reasons, and Ms. Dwyer won't be here today for personal reasons, and I actually don't know about Mr. Kellen at this time, so I'm going to assume he's on the way. So also, I just want to thank everybody for being here. I think that it's really important that we do this and we collaborate amongst each other, so I'm glad that we have this opportunity to meet together at the same table. So thanks, everybody.
So, and I agree with Kathleen that we're so happy all of us to be together, and we don't get these opportunities that often. So, and without further ado, let's get this ball rolling. Would you like to get started? Kevin?
Yes, ma'am. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you, Vice Mayor, School Chair. My name's Kevin Chatelier. Today we're going to be providing the school board and the city council with an overview presentation of the combined city and schools 5-year forecast. So it's really the beginning of the overall budget process where we're starting to kick it off and begin engaging the elected body, the elected officials, with what we're seeing and what potential trends we're going to be seeing through the upcoming budget making process, budget drivers, and sneak peek at what we're seeing with revenue projections at this point in time in the budget process. So in front of everybody, or provided to everybody, is a more comprehensive document. So included within this document are various city funds that have been evaluated, looked at, and discussed for public policy discussion on the city side. Schools provided their input and what they're anticipating is be their budget drivers' impact on their operations. But in terms of the presentation today, we're going to try to narrow it down to a focus of city that pertains to both city and schools. So we're going to do a budget by committee today, a presentation by committee today with Nikki Johnson, who will be coming up and talking about the economic overview of the Hampton Roads region in Virginia Beach. So Nikki's with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, and she's the regional economist. I'll come back up during the middle segment of the presentation to talk about what we're seeing with revenue projections, and then transition into the city's 5-year forecast before turning it over to the school CFO, Crystal Pate, who will talk about the school's 5-year forecast projection.
Before we really get rolling, I think we were supposed to do a roll call. I apologize. If the clerks, we don't have to do it? All right. Just want to make sure we want to keep everything right on track. Thank you. I apologize for interrupting you.
It's quite okay. It was a perfect time for a break, so I had a transition slide. So the thing I was going to talk about is really the annual purpose of the 5-year forecast is really to get an overview of the current financial conditions of both cities and schools. So there's several assumptions that are made throughout the 5-year forecast, and we'll talk about those as we're talking about expenditures and revenues. And then, it really is to establish the framework of a joint collaboration between city and schools to have a policy level discussion about, ongoing issues, combined topics that are impacting both city and schools, state, federal issues, things of that nature. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to talk about the economic outlook at Hampton Roads. I was explaining to a council member earlier, there was a point in time whenever city staff attempted to play the role of economist and do this, but then we finally realized why play and pretend to be an economist whenever we can have a real one come and give the information on our behalf. So with that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to discuss the economic outlook. Now, just starting broad term, despite the significant policy changes and economic uncertainty that we faced over the past year, the broader economy has remained remarkably resilient so far. But as you'll see today, this is slightly less true for Hampton Roads, as federal cuts have had really an outsized impact on our region's economy. All right, starting with the most broad measure of the national economy, we see that GDP contracted in the first quarter of 2025. It was down 0.6 percentage points from the previous quarter. This was largely due to pre-ordering to get ahead of the tariffs, which caused a surge in imports, which caused net exports to draw down GDP. Now, following, in the second quarter, we see this significant surge in GDP. It was up 3.8 percentage points from the previous quarter. The volatility of both of these quarters is largely just due to tariffs. And if we remove that noise, we do see that the fundamentals of the economy, consumer spending, business investment, these have remained strong in the first half of 2025. Now, moving forward, we are expecting slower growth in the second half of 2025 and in the first half of 2026. But slower growth does not mean a recession. We're just facing more of a lower trend growth towards GDP moving forward. After peaking in June of 2022, inflation at that point was up 9% year over year. We have seen that moderate significantly. As of the latest data for September of 2025, prices were up 3% year over year. That is above the Fed's target rate of 2%. So we still have some ways to go. But it is important to note that we have seen a slight uptick so far in 2025, and that is likely due to tariff-related pressures. But if we think about the tariffs, on paper, they've been very big, and it's been somewhat muted in the data. But we believe that that's likely to be a delayed effect. It's going to take some time for tariffs to fully work their way through to prices. And so we're likely to see a further uptick in inflation through the rest of 2025 and early 2026. But that outlook is very uncertain. Part of that is due to the stop-start nature of plenty of these tariffs. We don't know which ones are going to stay and which ones will be pulled back. And then we also have the impending Supreme Court decision. And so one of the president's main tariff powers, IEEPA, could be lost. That doesn't mean that all tariffs will go away. It's just going to affect some of the more broad Liberation Day tariffs versus some of the more sectoral-focused tariffs like steel. Job growth. So in the United States, Virginia, and Hampton Roads, we have seen a notable slowdown in job growth. The number of jobs added in the first half of 2025 in the nation is the slowest in recent years. Now, in Virginia, despite the federal job cuts, job growth has slowed, but it's stayed positive. It's remained remarkably resilient. We cannot say the same for Hampton Roads. We see that jobs have declined about 0.6 percentage points when we compare January to August of 2025. Now, like I said, we still have not seen the full effect of all of the federal cuts. Many of them are still ongoing. It's also important to note that if you were a furloughed employee or if you received a deferred resignation, you are still counted as employed in the data. And so we have not seen that full effect of the federal workforce and contract cuts. And so we're likely to see a further slowdown through the rest of 2025 and into early 2026. But the outsized impact on Hampton Roads should be no surprise when you think about the concentration of federal employment here in the region. We are home to the third largest federal civilian workforce in the nation. If we look at the federal employees as a share of all full-time employees, residents, these aren't jobs, these are people who are living within our region, it's about 11.3%. That's more than 3 times the national average. In the city of Virginia Beach, it's slightly below the regional average at 10.9%, but still higher than the state average. And so that impact is going to continue to affect us at a greater rate than it does the rest of the country at large. If we look at job growth by industry over the past year, we can see that we've lost about 2,000 federal government jobs. I believe that that's a low estimate because we're still waiting for that full impact to be realized in the data. But the largest gains over the past year have been in healthcare and social assistance, and how we've lost more manufacturing jobs over the last year than even federal government. But that's largely due to long-term trend decline in manufacturing over time versus anything that's happened just specifically over this past year. But overall, what you're seeing, these broad sectoral trends where most of the growth is concentrated in services, many of the losses are concentrated in manufacturing and federal government. That's actually very much mirroring what we're seeing at the national level as well. Labor market conditions, as I mentioned, have cooled. Both nationally and Virginia, we're seeing a slowdown in labor market trends, not a decline. That is not true for Hampton Roads. Hampton Roads, we've seen a steady decline both in our civilian labor force and individual employment since the start of 2025. Now, labor force and individual employment are still above pre-pandemic levels, but we have seen this sustained slowdown through 2025. With the shutdown and ongoing federal cuts, we're likely to see a further contraction throughout the rest of 2025. I believe that will ease some as we get through the second half of 2026, but we're still going to see that impact. In Virginia Beach, we're seeing the exact same trend. Labor market conditions are slowing considerably. They're actually contracting. And the pace of decline in the city is actually faster than what we're seeing at the regional average. And while in Hampton Roads, civilian labor force and individual employment are still above those pre-pandemic levels, that's not the case for Virginia Beach. They've actually fallen below levels that we saw just prior to the pandemic in February 2020. The unemployment rate, both in Virginia Beach and Hampton Roads, has historically fallen below the national average. That's due in part to demographics. We tend to have more higher educated workforce relative to the nation, which means we tend to have lower unemployment rates. But we are seeing that that gap has started to close with a more stronger deterioration of labor market conditions in the region and in the city relative to the nation. So if we compare over the past year from August 2025 to August 2024, we've seen that the unemployment rate in the US has ticked up about 0.1 percentage points. Compared to Hampton Roads, it's about 0.5 percentage points. In Virginia Beach, it's 0.3. Now, we're still at historically low levels. 3.2 unemployment rate is still a very good number. But we are likely to see a further uptick moving forward through the end of 2025 and early 2026. As I said, we have not seen the full impact of layoffs, federal cuts, government shutdown. That is not yet fully reflected in the data. So we might see a further increase moving forward. Turning to the housing market. Data through September of this year shows home sales ticked up slightly when we compare it to the previous year. Previous year, we were at historically low homes sold within the region. Now, a lot of that flies with mortgage rate trends. We saw mortgage rates come down considerably over the last year. At the peak, they were about 7.6% in 2023. As of the latest data for October 2025, we're at about 6.5%. So from 7.6% to 6.5%, that's good. But if you compare that to prior to the pandemic, mortgage rates were hovering around, 3.5%, 4%. So we still have some way to go. And that elevated mortgage rate has continued to put pressure on home buying, and that's why the number of homes sold within the region are still below those pre-pandemic levels. We were hovering around 22 to 2,400 just prior to the pandemic. Now we're just a little bit above 2,000. And so home sales have yet to fully recover from the pandemic surge and subsequent decline. We see a very similar trend in the city of Virginia Beach. The number of homes sold year to date is about 9,000 here in the city. That's through September. Rebounded slightly from that historic low in 2025, which is positive news, but we're still below pre-pandemic levels. Virginia Beach residential units sold, this is existing home sales, it's actually below levels that we last saw in 2015. So still at historically low rates. Now, home price growth has slowed from the rapid pace that we saw post-pandemic. At one point, prices rose an additional 40 percentage points within less than 3 years. Crazy time. In the second quarter of 2025, home prices rose an additional 7.9 percentage points. Nationally, we actually saw slightly faster growth in Hampton Roads. Over that same period, they were up about 9.2 percentage points. That is interesting because Hampton Roads home prices usually grow at a slower pace relative to the nation, but we are seeing slightly faster growth over the past year. In Virginia Beach, the median sales price year to date through September actually reached $400,000 in 2025. That's up 4.9% from the prior year. Slightly faster pace of growth than what we saw in 2024 over the same period. So slightly faster growth than the relative previous year. It's the same trend that we're seeing in the region overall. The primary factor keeping home price growth elevated, I'm guessing we can all guess, it's housing, right? That persistent shortage of available homes. Here we have the month's supply of housing inventory. How long it would take to sell off the current inventory of housing given the current pace of sales. Now, prior to the pandemic, both Hampton Roads and Virginia and the United States were hovering just a little bit below 3 months, around 2.7. We saw that fall to a historical low during the pandemic of actually just 1 month. Healthy market is around 3.5 months. But as of September, we see the month's supply has increased slightly, but in Hampton Roads, it's still at about 2.3 months. So we still have yet to exceed those pre-pandemic levels. The United States, in contrast, actually has. They're at about 3.3 months. So they're right in line with where they were prior to the pandemic. And so what this means is tighter inventory is likely why we're seeing faster housing price growth within the region relative to the nation. Now, all in all, 2 big factors that we're seeing: federal job, contract cuts. We just got out of the longest shutdown in history. On top of that, we have ongoing tariff pressures. All of those factors are likely to continue to weigh on the outlook moving forward. One bright spot, however, is defense spending. We saw significant increases in the latest National Defense Authorization Act in shipbuilding. So that's going to be a really positive boost for our Hampton Roads region, which should help keep our economy still growing. We also aren't necessarily expecting a recession in Hampton Roads. We are expecting more of a slowdown, as we've seen with the labor market so far relative to the nation, but that should be a positive boost. Another factor, though, is the international immigration. Immigration policies are slowing international arrivals. It's important to consider the fact that in Hampton Roads, if you look at the 3 components of population growth, it's the natural change, births minus deaths, domestic migration, and international migration. Both Hampton Roads and the city of Virginia Beach consistently lose population due to net domestic outmigration. We have more people leaving the region, going to another part of the country, than coming in from other parts of the country, right? Now, the natural change in the population due to long-term demographics is slowly declining. In 2024, international migration was the largest contributor of population growth both in Virginia Beach and in Hampton Roads at large. So how immigration policies will weigh on our already anemic population growth is still a question, but I think it could be a factor. And then that will likely continue to flow through and give us slower labor market growth overall. So overall, the economy is slowing but stable. We're expecting slower growth through the rest of 2025 and into the first half of 2026, but we are not expecting a recession. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. So, as I noted before, we'll be doing the presentation by committee today. And I just kind of want to back up again and talk about the document that's before you all today, but also will be posted to the city's internet or the website later on today. It's more comprehensive. It goes in depth with a lot of writing and narrative related to each of the various revenue streams that I'm going to be talking about shortly, in addition to some of the city's funds such as Waste Management Fund, Town Center, SSD. And again, I can't thank Nikki enough, my staff and Crystal and her staff, and the level of effort it took to put the overall document together. So shifting away from the economic discussion for a few moments to talk about revenues. So in the development of any budget, first thing we're going to look at is baseline revenue projections. So some of the assumptions that are made in the development of the five-year forecast are things such as the existing tax rates and policies are to remain in place in perpetuity throughout the five-year forecast. So for example, if a deficit's projected in any one given year, there's no assumption that a rate will be adjusted up to close that gap or vice versa. There's no assumption that baseline expenditure or program will go away to close that gap. This is just a development tool, policy discussion tool, and we use each annual budget process to refine that and make those funding decisions. So again, looking at revenues, they're based on growth trend analysis. So we look at the most recent actual revenues being collected, and we look at long-term actuals to project over the five-year forecast period. And then a big assumption in this is the assumption that the city-school combined revenue sharing formula remains as is, currently adopted throughout the forecast period. So one of the things I'm going to look to do are use the graphs to kind of talk about, as similar as what Nikki was doing, a little background context of that's driving some of the revenue streams. So starting with real estate, which is by far our largest local revenue source, it represents, in fact, 46% of the total general fund revenue and is shared with schools. So this visualization is a look back at assessment data for real estate assessment back to 2002. And I know they're small bars, but each year you'll see a blue bar and an orange bar. And what that's representative of are the different components of the assessment base. So the blue is the residential year-over-year assessment growth, and then in terms of a percentage, and the orange is commercial assessment growth year-over-year. So one of the things going back to 2002 you can really see is in the early 2000s, the city experienced high assessment growth in residential and commercial assessment base. And then you see the fall off, and then you see several years of negative depreciation, or actually depreciation of home values. So that's the boom and the bust. That was the housing bubble that occurred where residential assessments were growing greater than 20% per year. And then we experienced several years of the market correcting itself and home values actually decreasing. And then in the mid-2010s, we began seeing some level of consistent revenue growth. So you might notice there's a red bar going across. So what that represents is the historical average assessment growth that the city's relied on year over year in budget development and to support annual services. It's about 5% is the long-term average. Working with the real estate assessor's office, we, at this point in time of the budget process, we get her input and we get a preliminary estimate on what the projection is for real estate growth, assessment growth in coming years. So again, it's very early in the process, as it always is, and she won't know more until she's done with her annual report and the report outcomes in February, much later in the budget process. But as you can see by the gray bars there, she's anticipating growth of being about 2.8% in year one of the forecast, 3% the next 2 year 2 and 3 of the forecast, and leveling off to about 2% in the out years of the forecast. And as you can see, this is below that 5% historical average that the city's typically used to receiving or supporting services with. Overall, the revenue is anticipated to grow. Real estate's anticipated to be about $738 million in support of general fund services next year. So one of the things that typically happens is going from assessment growth to budgeted estimated real estate revenue growth doesn't always materialize or come out to be the exact same. So one of the reasons for that are some of the exemption programs and the way that they're accounted for and budgeted. So for example, the city of Virginia Beach has a mandate, as all Virginia localities do, to provide tax relief for disabled veterans. So it's a mandated program. The state passed adoption for this back, I believe, in 2016 is whenever it became codified. And so what we're experiencing with this is year over year rapid growth in this exemption year over year. So as you can see in FY26, the current year that we're working within, the exemption in this program was about $35.3 million. And we're anticipating this to grow to about $44.6 million in FY27. That $9.2 million annual growth, to give context to that, each penny of the real estate tax rate generates about $8.4 million. So we're now to that point where annual growth in this program is exceeding what the city generates in 1 cent of the real estate tax rate. So over time, looking back, you can see we've had this gradual growth. And part of the driver of this is the assessment growth that the city's experienced. But the larger contributing factor is the level of active participation that we're seeing in this. We're seeing year-over-year enrollment within this program of about 23% on average, which is really escalating it. To give some additional context of the $44.6 million, so in terms of the overall assessment base, that's the equivalent of about $4.6 billion of the city's assessment base being tax exempt. Tax exemption of these individuals or the qualification is really outside of the control of the city. It's something that the Department of Veteran Affairs makes a determination of whether an individual is 100% disabled or not. This can range from hearing loss to sleep apnea to a range of things that might total up to individuals being 100% disabled. So the accounting for this program here is actually excluded from our overall revenue estimates. So that's what I was talking about. When you talk about assessment growth being 2.8%, you might see budgeted growth year over year being slightly less than that in terms of real estate. Another local program that we have, our local exemption program, is the elderly and disabled program. The city's had this program in place for well over 30 years, and this is a local option program where individuals who are disabled or individuals who are 65 years and older and meet income thresholds have the opportunity to receive either partial or full exemption of their real estate tax bill. Over time, this program's grown at a more sustainable course than the Disabled Veterans Program. As you can see, the growth in this program year over year from 26 to 27 is anticipated to be about $1 million, where it's going to be about $17.2 million in FY27. Every few years, we do regional benchmarking of this program to see how Virginia Beach compares to other Hampton Roads localities. And time and time again, Virginia Beach is by far and away most generous in the exemption of this program and providing this form of tax relief. Historically, this program has been budgeted for on a gross basis. So in other words, as a part of the annual budget process, we estimate this revenue and we have offsetting appropriation of an equal amount. And so what that's resulted in over the years is the appearance of an additional, in the case of FY27, an additional $17.2 million being available and looking at real estate revenue estimates to support other general government services. However, the reality is we're not even really going to receive it. It's an exemption. So similar to the tax relief for the disabled veterans program where that's netted out of the revenues, a recommendation we're making going forward is to treat this in the same way so that we don't give the appearance of additional revenue being there to support general government services and overstating what the actual budget is. Shifting away from real estate, looking at personal property, which is our second largest local tax revenue. So whenever individuals think about personal property, they typically think of the vehicle assessments and $4 per 100 of vehicle assessments. But personal property is actually a mix of different tax personal property types, such as business personal property, mobile homes, RVs, trailers, etc. So taking a second to familiarize everybody with this visual of what this looks like for personal property, as all the revenue slides from this point forward will have the similar format. So the orange line going across is the budgeted amount for each of the years dating back to FY20. The yellow line going across is the actual received, so you can see the context of where the actuals landed with original budget estimates. And then the green line going forward is the projection through the 4 or 5 year forecast period. So we are anticipating growth in this revenue stream to FY27 estimate of about $228 million, with an assumed long-term average growth around 3% on average the remaining years of the forecast. But we're typically conservative in projecting this revenue stream. There's a lot of outside factors and influences, market volatility, such as the chip shortage that impacted the production of new vehicles, resulting in the inflation of used vehicle values. So over time, a lot of these things are monitored and looked at, but this isn't something we can look at on a month-to-month basis. It's a calendar year tax with 90% of this revenue coming in basically in the month of June. So what we're working off of right now to try to project what will materialize in June of 2027, 2 years from now, we're working off of what occurred at the end of last year, FY25. So again, it's one of the more difficult revenue streams to project and anticipate what's going to actually happen. But here recently, we've been able to do a pretty good job at that. Another calendar year tax is BPOL, or Business Professional Occupational License. So if a business operates within the city of Virginia Beach, they obtain a business license. That's what this is. The amount of the tax or the license, cost of the license varies. So if a business has gross receipts that are less than $200,000, they have a tiered fee structure in which they'll get an annual license for an amount of $30, $40, or $50. If gross receipts are reported by a business in excess of $200,000, then a tax rate's applied to those gross receipts, and that is then remitted. Again, similar to personal property, we're a little cautious and slow in our projection of this, as this is also a calendar year tax, with the bills revenue being received primarily in the month of March. So again, that's late in the budget process. So really, for the majority of the overall budget process, we'll be working off of the FY25 actuals, as we won't be getting real-time updates as to how this revenue is trending throughout the year. Again, anticipating growth of this in FY27 to be around $71.4 million, and resuming the long-term historical growth rate of about 2% per year. This one can be kind of tricky also. An underlying factor in here, you might see a year of growth and then flat, little to no growth. The city has a 2-year business exemption program, BPOL exemption program, where if a business is new to the city of Virginia Beach and registers, they're eligible to be exempt from this tax for 2 years. And so sometimes what you catch are new businesses coming out of that exemption program and hitting the baseline. General sales tax revenue. So everybody's primarily familiar with the sales tax that individuals pay whenever they go purchase goods at a grocery store or at a hardware store. So the Hampton Roads general sales tax applied is 6%. So of the 6%, the state retains 4.3%. 0.7% is a regional tax. It goes to a regional entity, and the localities all retain 1% of the sales tax. So this visual here, it reflects that 1% of general sales tax that the city retains, and it's shared with schools via the revenue sharing formula. So not to confuse matters, but this is, the schools also, in the development of their operating budget, receive a state shared sales tax. So from the 4.3% that the state retains of that, they then separately remit a portion of that to schools directly, and that's estimated and appropriated in the school's operating budget, and that's roughly about 1% as well, I think $94 million. So looking back over time, historically this is a very consistent, reliable, predictable revenue stream. You can see that there was a gap or a divergence that occurred during the pandemic era. We were anticipating general sales to actually decline. However, outside influencing factor occurred where a court decision was made that online sales tax needed to be remitted to the locality in which the good was purchased. Previously, prior to 2020, that didn't occur. Online sales did not have sales tax applied to them. So fortunately, the timing of that couldn't have been better at the beginning of the pandemic, where the city was actually able to recover pretty quickly in this revenue stream, and instead of a loss, we saw year-over-year growth in this. Since that time, you can see that it's stabilized, and we're seeing the consistent level of growth. We're anticipating this revenue stream to grow by about 3% each year of the forecast period, including FY27, with revenues being about $101.2 million. Cigarette tax is a little different story to this one. As you can see, we're anticipating year-over-year decline of about 5% in cigarette tax revenue. So similar to the general sales tax, where outside influence of a court decision resulted in additional revenue being collected, over time, the cigarette tax has also had some outside influencing factors resulting in a decline in this revenue source. Good news is, I would like to say that smoking cessation is a large part of this, and I do believe that is the case, but there's been other factors, such as the General Assembly raising the smoking age from 18 to 21, except for making an exception for active duty military personnel. And then there's been other influences in the market, such as vaping products. And the localities currently do not have the capacity to apply tax to that. The cigarette tax or the tobacco tax stamp only applies to nicotine products and tobacco. The General Assembly has the authority, and they tax vaping products, but that's not yet been provided. That discretion has not been provided to localities yet, so I can't really certainly say that all of this is a result of individuals stopping nicotine habits, but instead there might be some leakage in this revenue source as them just going to another source in the vaping products. Another one of the trustee taxes, and these are typically what we call the cigarette tax, restaurant, hotel, or the trustee taxes. And the benefit of these revenues is we're able to look at these on a monthly basis and get a sense of how they're trending throughout the year. So we're not waiting for the end of the budget process or one point in time of the year. We're actually able to look at these. And so with that being the case, we're fairly accurate in these revenue projections over time. With restaurant, obviously the pandemic created some uncertainty, and we had a couple of years of revenue overperformance during that time frame. However, since then, restaurant tax revenue has come back in terms of being consistent, predictable, and reliable, with a long-term average growth of, I believe, around 3 to 4%. We're anticipating this to continue throughout the forecast period, with FY27 revenue estimates being $115.4 million and growing in the out years. Something I want to talk about also is, skipped on the cigarette tax, but with restaurant, is the tax rate applied. So the city of Virginia Beach has a 6% tax rate on meals, which is tied with Chesapeake as being the lowest in the Hampton Roads region. One of the things we do each year as part of the budget process is we also do a benchmarking of these type of trustee tax and larger tax rates of all the localities to see how competitive Virginia Beach is remaining. And so I'm happy to report that restaurants, Virginia Beach remains tied as the lowest in the region. Hotel tax, or the transient occupation tax rate. So the rate applied within the city of Virginia Beach, the citywide tax rate's 8%. So with the exception of Sandbridge, where there's a 9.5% tax rate applied, the additional 1.5 is an additional hotel tax surcharge for the sole purposes of supporting sand replenishment within the Sandbridge region of the city. And then of the total tax rate, Sandbridge also retains an additional 5% dedicated currently for the exact same purpose to ensure adequate sand replenishment exists within the Sandbridge region of the city. So similar to the pandemic trend of general sales and the restaurant meals tax, there was quite a bit of uncertainty in the hotel tax, and to our surprise, we saw a rapid level of growth of year-over-year actuals in the hotel taxes. However, unlike those revenue streams, since that point in time, this revenue has really become flat in terms of year-over-year growth. So we're not anticipating, based on what we're seeing today, this to change over the course of the next year. So we're anticipating yet another year of flat growth in this. And then in the out years of the forecast, resuming the historical growth rate of about 2%. What's interesting with this is even though it's flat in terms of the tax rate, year over year, we're seeing growth in the flat tax fee. So within Virginia Beach, $2 per room night's charged for each hotel room night stay. And so what we're actually seeing is year over year growth in that, indicating that there's more visitors, there's more visitations, but there just appears to be a softening in the willingness of paying the average daily room rate, which might be declining. Shifting away from revenues for a moment to talk about operational expenditures and assumptions. And looking at the operating budget, you got personnel accounts and then operating accounts. So talking about some of the personnel assumptions applied in terms of compensation, cost of living adjustment, the assumed increase is 3% annually each year of the forecast period. This is in line with exactly 3%, which is in line with the step plan authorized or approved by City Council about 3 years ago. And it will remain consistent with that. The Virginia Retirement System rates, or the VRS, you might often hear that referred to. So the city and schools both participate in a state pension plan. And so the determination of the rates that are to be paid by each locality is determined by the state based on the actuarial needs of that fund. So it's adjusted every 2 years. FY27 is a year where we're anticipating a rate adjustment. So for the forecast and in preparation of the budget, we're anticipating a 1.5% increase in that VRS rate. That translates to roughly a year-over-year increase of about $6 million. Health insurance, there's a lot of uncertainty in the health market and the future costs of health care and health insurance. So in working with schools as well as Mercer, the city's anticipating or is understanding that future costs are going to go up by about 8% per year. So we're anticipating the employer contribution to grow at least that, if not more, in future years. And we'll get into more of that in just a moment. Also for the assumption and awareness, so typically for the last 3 or 4 years, the city's adopted a budget anticipating the use of attrition savings. So following back on the onset of this and talking about reductions weren't made in an effort to close any financial gap, for the purpose of the forecast, personnel has been fully loaded and there's no assumed use of attrition savings. Something we've been seeing over the last several years. I think in FY21, the city had about $30 million in vacancy savings. At the closeout of FY25, we had vacancy savings of only about $14 million. So as the city's actively filling these positions, we're seeing less and less vacancy savings available, which is why the utilization of attrition savings is really a year-to-year decision that's made as part of the budget development process. In terms of operating accounts, we're assuming inflation around 3%. That's higher than the Fed Reserve's ideal rate of 2%, but it's consistent with what they're projecting based on current market trends. Some of the other things that we try to take into account are known contractual increases for software such as Microsoft, or in the case of the city garage, the auto parts or maintenance contracts for specialized equipment. We try to account for that as best we can. And then we're also assuming debt service remains flat for the forecast period. So this visual provides the baseline forecast for the city's general fund in two visual representations. So taking the applied assumptions and the revenue projections compared with the baseline expenditure assumptions, we are anticipating each year of the forecast period to operate or to result in a deficit or a gap. So you can see at the bottom of the table, looking at the numbers, year one, about $11 million, growing to about $72 million over the forecast period. The visual representation at the top is taking the same information except looking at it, expenditures and revenue in terms of year-over-year growth as a percentage. So you can see that the blue line represents expenditures, and that's slightly outpacing the year-over-year anticipated percentage growth in total revenue for the general fund. One of the things you can't really see in this are some of the ups and downs that occur in year-over-year growth. Remember me talking about VRS being a every other year budget driver? So this slide tries to capture that or give a reflection of that. So this looks at salaries and fringes as a budget driver. So the dark blue line represents the dollar amount year-over-year increase in salaries and fringes based on all the previous assumptions I was talking about, 3% cost of living adjustment, health insurance, VRS rate adjustments. The light blue line represents total general fund revenue growth anticipated minus that to be shared with schools from the revenue sharing formula. So you can see just with that visual alone, salaries and fringes are a large driver of the annual operating budget, and they're outpacing in all but 1 year. Salary and fringe growth alone is outpacing anticipated general fund revenue growth. So this isn't too concerning, as it's pretty typical of organizations where personnel is your largest operating budget driver. It's just one of the things that we try to be mindful of and give for context. And again, this is a planning tool. Nothing is fixed requiring the 3% or the assumptions in here. Things could change. So historically, it's been a decision by City Council during the budget development process to find the right balance of the cost of living adjustments, pay raises in line with what's affordable and what the public has a willingness to tolerate in terms of taxation. Another operating budget driver that we were talking about is health insurance. So instead of going a projection forward, I was going to provide a visual of a projection going back. The city and schools have a combined self-insured health plan in which the offerings and the benefits offered by both city and schools is of similar, but the accounting in terms of the city's contributions and schools' contributions is captured in separate funds. So this visual here is a reflection, pro forma, if you will, of the city's health insurance fund. So I know it's a lot of numbers, so I'm going to try to use some text boxes to pop up here to help kind of navigate this. So back in FY20, well, it did not pop up. So I will just try to navigate this then without that. So in FY20, you can see the revenue. The first column there is about $64.5 million. So this represents revenue into the fund as the employer and employee contribution. Working down, the expenditures are the amount that the city paid for employee health claims and administrative costs of the health plan was about $55 million. Taking the difference, revenue minus expenditures, you can see in that year there was a surplus of revenue of about $9.5 million, which fell to the cumulative fund balance that year and of about $34.1 million. That cumulative fund balance is the thing to monitor going left to right across this table. As you'll notice that the health fund for the city has typically been well in excess of about $30 million, with the exception of more recent years where we're seeing a drawdown on that as healthcare costs are increasing. So this is signaling that it's likely time to begin evaluating increases in employee and employer contributions. The city's held employee contributions and healthcare premiums flat for about 7 years. The city, as employers, provided continued increases on average about 3% per year. And so one of the things that we're trying to be mindful of in that over time is this bottom visual here. This is taking the employer-employee contribution as a pool and given a percentage reflection of that. So you can see that the employer on average is about 80% and the employee is about 20% of that makeup. This is a ratio that we've tried to be mindful over time and will likely be something we try to keep in mind in future rate setting discussions. But again, it's something that we're going to continue to track and monitor, and we've been talking about in the development of the current year. These trends are changing. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so we will be evaluating this with rate increases likely in the future. So there's some uncertainty in the health insurance, but there's also some uncertainty in other aspects and outside factors that we can't really wrap our minds around yet or don't have enough confidence in to be able to build into the baseline forecast. And this is related to decisions and implementation of programs and policies in state and federal revenue and what that might look like. So, for example, within the document in front of you, the 5-year forecast, there's a significant write-up that was provided by Human Services and the Department of Housing and Neighborhood Preservation related to some of their federally supported programs and how changes in the federal and state revenue might negatively impact those or what could be challenges going forward. We're all familiar with the SNAP discussion recently where the federal government, through the extension, they were able to begin funding that initiative again and providing the SNAP supplements. But this is, they provide the funds, but it's a locally administered program. And so the Department of Human Services, in doing that, they receive a reimbursement from the federal government to administer it. So recent discussions and indications are that communication's been made where for the administrative cost of this, the federal government's looking to move to instead of a 50-50 cost share with the federal government covering 50, state and local making up the other 50, 25% federal and 75% state and local. So in terms of what that is in day-to-day operations and impacts or what other policy changes the Department of Human Services has to make to keep in line with the error ratio that the state is going to have to be more mindful of in the future to ensure that they receive 100% of the federal revenue for the programs. There's a lot of uncertainty with that. And with the Department of Housing, there's also been communication from the Department of Agriculture, and I'm sorry, not Department of Agriculture, but the federal government in terms of the level of HUD or Section 8 housing funds that will be handed down in future budgets. And then Nikki did a much better job than I could in talking about the tariffs. Good, bad, right, wrong in terms of economic policy, the macroeconomics of it, escape my ability, but I do know that there is going to be a reality of they will have an impact on the price of goods, and the city's not immune to increases in the price of goods, just like residents and citizens. The city is also impacted by inflation and those cost increases as well. So it's just something we need to be mindful of in future years. So I don't want to be so negative that I ended on this negative note. So I did want to kind of give this visual, and I had a little bit cleaner version with a slide to cover this up, but I'll just take a second to walk everybody through it. Whenever we talk about balancing the operating budget, we typically talk about making sustainable reductions. And you might recall a few slides ago, the baseline forecast, year one was anticipating roughly an $11 million gap or deficit in year one of the forecast. So what this visual here represents is if an $11 million sustainable reduction is made in year one of the forecast and a program or a service goes away of that amount in perpetuity, you're actually bettering your future position, as that's not something that's going to come back in future years. And so you can see it taking that $11 million out each of those years, you actually lower your year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5 deficit by a like amount. So I provide that as we still got a lot of budget process to go. Come March, the city manager will present to city council a balanced, sustainable proposed operating budget that if reductions are needed, it will be proposed reductions to be made in a sustainable manner. So with that, that's what the city has, and I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Pate. Yes, sir.
Okay. Stacy, can we hold off questions till after? Sure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, Chair, members of the school board, and colleagues. Appreciate this opportunity to share with you the 5-year forecast for Virginia Beach City Public Schools. This presentation is designed to give us a forward-looking view of both the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead as we continue our shared commitment to providing an excellent education for every student. Our mission is to empower every student to become a lifelong learner and engaged global citizen. Our vision that every student achieves their maximum potential. Our core values of put students first, seek growth, be open to change, do great work together, value differences, guide every decision we make as a school division. Our work continues to be guided by Compass to 2030, the division's strategic plan. This plan provides a unified division-wide direction. It focuses on preparing every student to be future ready with a central element called the Future Ready Profile that describes the skills, habits, and mindsets of students that students will build from pre-K through 12th grade. Compass to 2030 is structured around several focus areas, including challenging and supporting every student to excel and be future ready, enhancing well-being, resilience, and responsibility, valuing and investing in our staff, strengthening community partnerships, and advancing organizational excellence and efficient operations. The framework emphasizes high expectations, strong relationships, and giving each student the support they need. Every budget decision we make should align with this plan and advance our long-term goals. Achieving these goals requires responsible financial stewardship to sustain the high-quality programs our community expects. These priorities form the foundation of our financial and operational planning, and they shape every decision we make, academic, operational, and financial. Our students and staff continue to achieve at exceptional levels. Our preliminary on-time graduation rate is 96.9%, among the highest in the Commonwealth. Our dropout rate remains low at 2.2%. We exceed passing rates in all SOL subjects, leading the region in reading, writing, science, and history. In 24-25, 35% of high school students enrolled in advanced placement courses, and 74% of the AP exams taken by Virginia Beach City Public School students were awarded a score of 3 or higher. Students have earned 14,540 industry credentials across 130 plus different approved credentialing exams. And over 3,200 students have completed approximately 44,000 work-based learning hours, contributing an economic impact of over $550,000. These results reflect the strength of our staff, students, and community, and our collective commitment to excellence. Our financial forecast shows expenditures are projected to outpace revenues over the next 5 years. Key factors driving expenditure growth include rising compensation pressures, increasing healthcare costs, and debt service related to major capital projects. Projected deficits from 27 through 31 are not actual shortfalls, but early indicators of potential structural imbalance if current trends persist. The forecast is a planning tool and not a budget. It allows us to look ahead, identify challenges early, and develop strategies to maintain long-term fiscal sustainability. At this stage, no budget balancing actions are included, and the intent is to frame the conversation for future decisions. Enrollment and student demographics continue to evolve. While overall enrollment shows a gradual decline, the number of students with higher academic and social-emotional needs continues to rise. Trends include growth in English language learners and special education populations, fluctuations in students affected by poverty, which is influenced by economic and federal factors. These shifts increase demand for specialized instruction, mental health, and behavioral supports, all of which raise per pupil cost and are required under the Individuals with Disabilities Act and Titles I and III of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We have built the forecast using conservative assumptions. Our baseline revenue assumptions incorporate current federal, state, and local funding trends with modest growth projections, assuming no major formula changes. We gain additional insight into the state's budget when the governor introduces their budget, typically the third week of December. Key points to note are the state re-benchmarking for the next biennium will update key cost inputs and could significantly impact school division budgets. The re-benchmarked costs are submitted as part of the governor's introduced budget and become part of the budget deliberations. There are still issues with the school funding formula noted in the July 2023 JLARC report. This report identified major funding disparities, particularly for at-risk, special education, and English learner populations. Current state funding for these student population falls well below the levels identified as necessary by comprehensive cost studies conducted in other states. This shortfall limits Virginia schools' ability to provide the resources and support essential for an equitable and inclusive education. While progress was made in the 2024 and 25 budget processes, work remains to fully align funding with JLARC recommendations. Our 5-year revenue projection highlights include projected annual increases in the local contribution year over year are projected at 1.5% for 27, 2.8% for fiscal year 28 and 29, 2.2% for fiscal year 30 and 31. State revenue figures will be updated once the governor's budget is released and going forward during the General Assembly session. Currently, we are projecting a 3% increase for all 5 years of the forecast. Growth in state sales tax revenue has remained relatively flat. We are projecting a 0.5% increase for all 5 years of the forecast. The primary federal revenue source for the school operating fund are federal impact aid and Medicaid reimbursements. We are projecting a 5.1% increase in the first year of the forecast, and then the remaining years will be flat. And even though we've seen a temporary continuing resolution, it's important to note that the Federal Impact Aid Program is one of the only federal K-12 programs that is not forward funded. And that means that when the federal fiscal budget is not approved or a continuing resolution is not passed, school divisions receive no money for federally connected students. And furthermore, the amount the funding divisions are entitled to may end up being prorated up or down depending on the final funding level included in the federal fiscal year 2026. Other local revenue comes from various sources such as the Stop Arm Enforcement Program, tuition fees, facility rentals, indirect costs for grants, lost and stolen technology, and the sale of salvage materials and capital assets. The Stop Arm Enforcement Program had limited prior year revenues, but is expected to grow significantly during the forecast period. In addition, the implementation of a streamlined school facility rental platform and a revised fee structure to be implemented the latter part of this fiscal year is anticipated to boost future local revenue. This slide reflects the baseline revenue adjustments as dollar values in a line chart to reflect the trend. As you can see, state sales tax, federal revenue, and other local revenue remain modest, with slight upward trends in the revenue sharing formula and state revenue. Several key expenditure assumptions are built into the forecast. There's a 3% annual salary placeholder for staff. Employer health insurance, and Kevin went over that for the city, that increases 13.5% in fiscal year '27 for the schools, and 9% annually thereafter through fiscal year '31, based on our current health claims trend. We have a 3% inflation assumption for operating costs, and we have rising debt service and pay-go obligations as a result of ongoing increased large maintenance projects. These placeholders are not commitments, but planning figures subject to school board and city council approval during the annual budget process. This slide reflects the key budget assumptions for expenditures, again, as dollar values in a line chart so you can see the trend over the forecast period. As you can see, expenditures for personnel services and fringe benefits are steadily increasing over the forecast period, while non-personnel expenditures are remaining relatively flat. There's also a slight uptick in debt service payments as we anticipate future bond sales. Based on the outlined revenue and expenditure assumptions, the school division is projecting a deficit in the school operating fund for each year of the forecast period as shown on this slide. These figures reflect cost trends. These are not final budget decisions, but placeholders to model realistic future cost growth. And this slide reflects that baseline forecast as dollar values in a line chart, so you can see the trend over the forecast period, and the forecasted structural gap widens by 2031. We continue to face several budget pressures that will shape our outlook over the next few years. Maintaining competitive compensation to recruit and retain staff, rebuilding the health fund reserve to ensure stability in our self-insurance program, funding for the Princess Anne High School replacement project, managing declining enrollment alongside rising student needs, and addressing uncertainty in federal and state K-12 funding, especially with the conclusion of the All-In Virginia supplemental funding targeted at tackling 3 major K-12 education challenges: learning loss, literacy, and chronic absenteeism. These pressures are interconnected and require strategic prioritization moving forward. Our approach to financial management is strategic, disciplined, and collaborative. Virginia law requires a balanced budget each fiscal year, and we remain fully committed to that principle. We continue to monitor economic trends, engage stakeholders, and strengthen reserves to protect against future volatility, especially in the health insurance fund. We strive to balance immediate needs with long-term fiscal responsibility. There are several external factors that could significantly alter this forecast: possible changes to the state SOQ funding formula, adjustment to benefit rates in the next biennium, healthcare cost trends continuing to exceed projections, new state or federal mandates, evolving school board priorities, future compensation decisions, inflationary pressures on goods and services, and increased debt service obligations as major projects progress. These variables remind us that adaptability remains key. We will update projections as new data emerges throughout the budget process. So in closing, our goal is clear: to balance today's needs with tomorrow's vision, sustaining excellence while maintaining fiscal responsibility. Looking ahead, we will continue to align programs and staffing with available revenues, invest in our people, programs, and facilities, and partner closely with the city and the community. Together, we will ensure that Virginia Beach City Public Schools remain a model of educational and fiscal excellence for years to come. Thank you.
Okay, my colleagues, we have our challenges ahead of us. Let's start with cash, and we'll go to Stacy.
I just wanted to make sure, Director, Kevin.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Sorry, I
No.
couldn't get up here fast enough. I apologize.
And this was on page 27. I mean, every time I see that, there's just this sinking void, right? When you see cigarette taxes and we're still continuing to tax it. There is a House bill, cannabis bill, that's should be sitting on the soon-to-be governor's elect desk. Has that been talked about with Brent, who is our legislative aide? Has that been talked about that would be a bill that would be submitted to the governor to really take, I mean, that needs to be like the next plan of action. Because in that House Bill 2485 is vaping and other things. I know these are projected numbers, but I would think that needs to be in there as a way to say, but we have this as a plan of action.
Kevin, I got it. Councilmember Jackson Green, the next General Assembly session, we anticipate that cannabis is going to be taken up again. It'll have to be taken up by this session and then sent to the upcoming governor as well. So right now, I think it's tabled at the time until the next General Assembly session, which should start probably in the January, February timeframe. We anticipate that if this is passed in laws, there's going to be a significant debate amongst the General Assembly in terms of what revenues will go to the state and if there's going to be any local carve-out for revenue as well. And to your point, if there is a local carve-out, it should possibly be some significant dollar value to localities to deal with the impacts associated with it. We're not necessarily sure how they're allocated to us. They may not use the cigarette tax revenue timeframe, but if this is to come to fruition, if the General Assembly does take action in this, and if the governor does support it, it's like it could be a revenue source, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're going to go with Stacy, Jennifer, and then Kim.
Thank you. Can you go to slide 33? Do we have the information, or is it possible to break this information out between city employees and school board employees?
I have this pro forma from what we pulled in looking at the city fund. I can work to get the information and a historical look at this as well from the school's health fund to provide that to city council.
I think that would be useful in maybe formulating some additional questions.
Yes, sir.
And I guess the boat registration, did you touch on that? I might have missed that.
So the boat registration, I'll back up to personal property. So initially, in the proposed budget last year, there was a proposal to implement boat personal property tax that was swapped out in lieu of a registration fee that's dedicated entirely to the CIP coastal section. Okay. So that's actually a revenue source that comes in and goes right back out. They're still in the process of implementing it to go into effect. So we don't have anything to really revise our initial estimate off of. So we're still working off that initial estimate that was adopted in the current year budget.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go with Jen, Kim, Worth.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to, my thoughts are all over the place with this presentation because it's something that we get every year, and it's something that particularly for City Council, we know about these issues about housing stock and affordability. We know about out-migration and for whatever reason, perhaps if it's economic and work decline. So these are things that are, they come up over and over again. So my mind at this point is what tools are available to us at the city level? So we know there are a lot of unknowns at the federal level. There are some unknowns with the state. So as a city, what policy tools do we have available? All the tools, like what are all the options to us that we can look at, whether it's best practices or trying something new, trying something different. And if we don't yet have, if there's a tool that we don't yet have in our toolbox, what do we need to ask the General Assembly for, changes or permission to do? But I'm interested in putting everything on the table. So I know we have a lot of professional expertise in-house and also just in the region. Ms. Johnson just gave an incredible report. So I know that the information is out there. I would like it consolidated. So just at the city level, what are all the policy options? So as we're thinking about solutions, because we're elected to, at minimum, maintain a quality of life, hopefully to improve it. And so what are tools that we could try to address these issues? Because it just feels like it's a cyclical thing, and I'd like to know what, I just want to see some options.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kim, Worth, and Rosemary.
So, thank you, Councilwoman Rouse. Those were my exact words. My thoughts are all over the place too, but specifically in the housing market, the low inventory, the high housing costs. I think you reported 4.9%. The average home price is $400,000, and a new report out recently that the average age of a first-time home buyer is 40. And so my question in lockstep with Jennifer is, and you don't have to answer this now, we can talk about this later, but does the city plan to build additional affordable housing specifically to target first responders and teachers? From our side, recruiting and retention is probably not unlike you, a 24-hour-a-day job. And we're working really hard to recruit the very best teachers, quality teachers, but we also want them to be able to live in the city in which they work. And so I'm interested in the toolbox and moving forward with that too. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I'm, sorry, go ahead.
Please.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just want to comment on a couple of those questions regarding what the city's doing as it relates to attainable housing. Is it okay, Mayor? Okay. All right, so the city council recently had a housing study done, and out of that housing study, there were several recommendations, and some of those recommendations required significant outlay of general fund resources, and the city council, understanding the limited general fund resources that we have, decided to move in a different direction. So the direction that we moved towards was creating an attainable housing grant program, which basically allows developers seeking to build affordable attainable housing to unlock revenues from future development, like future property tax revenue, and then put that money back into their development to help cover the gap of the project. Recently, City Council approved 2 of those attainable housing grant program projects that's going to lead to the building of 372 homes in Virginia Beach. There's a misnomer out there that the city is building housing. The city generally does not have the capacity to build housing. We basically facilitate opportunities for developers in the private sector to build attainable housing through either the passing on of land or through creating incentive programs like what we recently created. It still continues to be a #1 priority to council, right? You know, if there's probably priority 1A, 1B, 1C, this is right up there with those as well. You know, but basically right now is, as everyone knows, we have limited land. Right, so the council did ask us to scrub our books to identify land for development opportunities. We've done that. We're going through the comprehensive plan process. Everybody anticipates that this is going to be a signaling towards the city moving towards a redevelopment and, where appropriate, denser development in certain areas, and also another look at our zoning code to tie all those things up. So the city is moving demonstrably in those efforts. Obviously, we can't do it all by ourselves. A lot of it really depends on what the private sector can bring to bear. A lot of that is complicated as well with the cost of doing business, the cost of debt, the cost of materials, the cost of supply, and in particular as well, the cost of labor and the shortage of labor as well. So it's a big problem. It's incredibly bigger than what a city, what a school division can do. And in some cases, it's a lot of big macroeconomics things that's leading to the lack of affordable housing being built and the pace by which it's very frustrating that it's being built in.
And thank you. If I can just address this too, Kim. Number of retreats ago, we named attainable housing our 4th highest priority after stormwater, public safety, and schools. And there are challenges out there and there are national challenges with housing. This is not unique to what we're trying to do. And as we do run out of land, it makes it especially difficult, and especially the only way that you're going to get attainable housing is density, commitments. And once again, when that happens, the neighborhoods, get up in arms, and, we're in a constant battle for that. And the fact that there is, from what I understand, 24 or 25% regulatory costs goes into building everything right now. It just makes everything expensive. And the other factor, since I was sworn in as mayor, the cost of building materials has gone up 99%. So we're all in the same boat. We really want attainable housing here in Virginia Beach, because that's the only way we're going to spur economic growth. We put more taxable units on the thing that really helps pay for schools and cities' operating budget.
And
Patrick?
Mr. Mayor, I want to add one more thing. And I can say from the School Modernization Committee, I know staff and the Vice Mayor, Mr. Cummings as well, we're encouraged to hear that the school board is thinking about going through a similar process that the city recently did in terms of looking at our inventory of property and our land, and some of it may not necessarily be necessary to stay in the same way that is currently being used. And those may create opportunities for other development inside communities, right? Obviously, we all know we're going to be mindful of what the comprehensive plan says, what zoning requires, and also the flavor, the decorum, and the cadence of a community when we're making those decisions. But as we kind of look at our demographic trends, we are encouraged that you all are looking in that direction as well to see what makes sense and should we redirect our efforts to reimagining what some of our old facilities can possibly be for the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to go with Worth, Rosemary, and Josh.
Thank you, Mayor Dyer, and thank all three presenters. Excellent job, all three of you. Thank you. So I also want to pile on it. This is a great conversation in general for both bodies. I'm glad to do this. And so when I see this, what can we do to raise revenues? Where can we go to cut expenses? And I know no one wants to talk about, I don't want about cut expenses today, but so it's about raising revenues to me, and that is what we're talking about. But I also want to add in economic development, jobs, tourism, things that raise the sales tax, property tax. And so my question after that statement is, Mr. Chatelet, my notes I didn't take down, what's your projection for next year for the real estate tax assessment increase? Is it, because it's been about 5.4% or so?
Yes, sir. 2.8% is what the real
Right.
estate assessor currently has it projected at.
So my question is, so that's down from maybe 5.4 or so the year before? So is
In
that-
terms of year-over-year growth, yes,
Okay.
sir. But it would still be 2.8% if this materializes at this level above the current assessment base.
Thank you.
Okay, Rosemary and Josh.
Just two quick little questions. One is, what is the cost per student? And the other question that I had while you're walking up is I saw where the students with disabilities, those numbers are really going up. And I can understand English as a second language, but can you explain why the numbers for the students with disabilities is going up so much?
Well, yeah. So I don't want to say what the per pupil cost is. We can get that to you and show you what the per pupil cost is, because we do it by federal, state, and local. So that's how we need to report it out. So I don't want to say it off the top of my head, but I can get it for you and provide you that information.
Okay.
It's up there, but we're not the highest.
Don?
Yeah, in terms of students with disabilities and their needs, there's been a large growth in students with autism, which require specialized settings in their classrooms based upon where they are with autism. That's just one example. Also included in consideration is a number of students with 504 that get additional accommodations that are required to help them meet their free and appropriate public education. So those numbers are going up and their needs are more, which really impacts us in personnel.
Okay, Josh?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, everybody, for the reports, and it's great to see everybody. I think this is probably the most conversation we've ever had around the table in the last couple of years. And in that spirit, I just want to acknowledge Kathleen, the chair, and the school board members, because I think over the last several years we've had more regular and routine dialogue, and I think the public needs to know that that we're working together, both bodies, and we have cordial collegial relationships with one another, and that's a really good thing. On the housing issue, I know the manager mentioned something, the mayor did as well, but, you know, one thing that struck me was, to the mayor's point, housing wouldn't be a priority if we didn't say it was. And for a long time, it hasn't been. And for a lot of applicants, as they go through the planning process, they go through planning commission and they come to city council, and then all of a sudden they hear from city council, where's the affordable housing at the very last minute? And that's not fair to an applicant because they've spent time, years, dollars to get to a point. And that was because it wasn't made a priority from the get-go. And I know firsthand several instances, one recently in District 4 with Councilwoman Ross Hammond, another one in my district at Cypress Point Shopping Center, where we started the conversation with the applicant at the very get-go. And importantly, we started the conversation with the community at the very get-go to try and explain what attainable housing, what workforce housing means. Who are the people that are living among us and in these places? These are people we depend on every day. These are our teachers, our firefighters, our municipal workers. And so we were able to, without even a program, just emphasize that it's a priority to the developer that be a component of their development. And what was it, Amelia? Maybe 9-10% of the development was attainable housing or below market rate housing, and that was because we asked them. And that's an important thing for all of us to keep doing. I want to commend the School Modernization Committee. Everybody's been working on that because prioritizing Princess Anne means that each and every school behind it gets done sooner. And I've got a couple questions, if you don't mind. Kevin, slide 21, oh, we're there, slide 21. My colleague over here to the left asked me why the dip in commercial assessments, and it kind of caught my eye too, and I tried to make up a reason, and maybe I'm right. Was it timing of construction, Atlantic Park, like big buildings coming online, and then all of a sudden, kind of here we are?
In terms of the 25,
Yeah.
which data point are we
Yeah,
talking
the
about?
24 to 25, the orange line.
So there was still an increase, right, of 2.5% roughly. And so what this is just a snapshot of the year-to-year annual growth of that. So even though it's not as high as it was the year before, it certainly doesn't mean that there was a decline in the commercial assessment base.
Slowing of the growth.
The one exception to a decline would be the FY23. Can I step away? That data point right there. So the real estate assessor uses the income-based approach when assessing commercial properties and values. And so coming out of the pandemic, there's a very real chance that the reported earnings for a lot of those businesses could have been down from the previous year, resulting in a true decline in the assessment base for some of those properties. But again, it's minor as that line going across there is 0. So there was certainly some adds during that time frame as well.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My next question is for Crystal, but before I get there, just one more point on the housing. It's just anecdotal, and I'm sorry, just indulge me for a moment, especially because we're coming up on a zoning ordinance update. The comprehensive plan is about to be finalized and hopefully approved. But ADUs, I just wanted to say this out loud because I moved into Thorogood back in 2020. There's a wonderful old lady. She's about 85. Her name is Jima, and she's very strong-willed woman. She lives right next door to me, and she owns a construction company. Shortly after we moved into the house, her husband passed away, and she built an attached dwelling in the back of her house. You can't even see it from the road. And she moved into the ADU, and that allowed her granddaughter and their family to come, and occupy the house. And so many of our seniors, it's so important, especially with rising healthcare and advanced care costs. People want to age in place. So I just wanted to offer that kind of softer side of an example where you know, this enables the housing stock to turn over in a wonderful neighborhood and a family to come together. And my mom is actually in town from Detroit, and I would love to have her come down here and do that kind of the same thing, but also keep and enshrine, you know, the sanctity and the character of our neighborhoods. So I just wanted to offer that anecdote. But Ms. Pate, the one question I had for you was the actuarial reserve. Do we talk to one another? Because I know there's different risk pools between city and school employees, and we have different employer side contributions. But are actuarial people talking to one another to make sure that decisions that we make on how much we want to contribute or don't contribute, because it's all really at the end of the day coming out of the same pocket?
You know, we use the same third-party consultant, and we work through the BEC, the Benefits Executive Committee. And we do communicate quite often about healthcare. We just have two different situations, and that's why I think the funds are now separate, even though they're consolidated under the school system. We keep things separate, and also because of our recent developments, we have been providing the school board periodic updates on a quarterly basis and trying to walk them through and educate them through how the consultant projects costs and recommends trends and what cost drivers there are. And Kevin and his team are part of that on the back end for the city as well.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Hutch?
Yes. Oh.
Hey, it's your turn. Kev, could you go to slide 6? Or you, Ms. Johnson? Thank you. So when you said that earlier, it was significant that, our payroll is where it is. What could you give a little bit more as to what that means to us as a whole, when you're talking about that, the jobs?
I mean, overall job growth, of course, is going to be your main contributor to overall economic growth. We want to see healthy job growth. There's also a question of when labor force growth is slowing significantly, the break-even number of jobs that you need in order to have enough jobs to feed the labor force can also be slowing. So there's that factor as well. But overall, yes, it's an important contributor to the economy.
Okay. The next question was with the ones with the chart with you had the federal government and all, the decrease in number 2,000 jobs.
Yes.
So was that, maybe I missed it. Was that over just that 1 year we lost 2,000 jobs? And was that because of DOGE or whatever was going on at the time? So is that an actual number now? Because I know a lot of those folks were hired back. And you may have said that.
Some of those folks are hired back, but it's also a continuing. I mean, the OMB right now, they're still looking for cuts. So we saw a huge impact in the beginning with DOGE. Some of those workers were definitely hired back. But then you also see ongoing cuts as they move through departments. But yes, this is data as of August 2025. So it's over that year range.
Okay. All right. So that's, the other slide you showed about how we are made up of so much of the DOD workforce, that's significant for us.
Exactly, and that's really the story of our labor market right now. We were just significantly exposed to those federal cuts.
Right, which we've been saying for a long time, but it's hard to do, is that we should diversify as much as possible, but
it's a curse and a blessing.
That's certainly easier said than done, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, the next one was the unemployment rate, that slide, when you showed the 3.2. So we're showing all the job losses, but then we're still at a low 3.2%. How do you make that work?
So the gap between these two lines reflects your unemployment rate, right? Because your civilian labor force are people who are either looking for work or employed, right? And so if they're both going down at the same trend, your unemployment rate is going to stay low. People are dropping out of the labor force. They're not looking for work, right? And at the same time, people are becoming unemployed. So the unemployment rate isn't going to shoot up because both of those factors are falling at the same time.
Okay, I think I understand. Thank you. Just the last comment, and it really goes to what a lot of folks have now said. School Board Member Melnick and Councilwoman Rouse and Councilman Schuman. All of y'all were hitting all around it. And I know with us, we've had a, referendum, and a lot of it pitted us against, some of us against the developers. And I think that we need to show that, this does show how important workforce housing, and that's the mayor and I kind of came up with that a couple months ago, is what we're calling it, because that's really what we need. And to take another chapter out of Councilman Shulman's book, a little anecdote. I was working out at the Fire Training Center the other day, and one of the young gentlemen that I hired 6 or 7 years ago came up to me all excited and said, "Chief, I just bought a house." And I was like, "Oh, buddy, that's so great. I'm glad you could afford it, and get that done." And he goes, "Yeah, it's in Isle of Wight." And, just like that, it's a little bit of my heart drops, because we need those folks to be here in the city. So that's why the grant program, Mr. Manager, and everybody that worked on that, Kevin and everybody, I think that's such a huge program. We need to support it as best we can, and we need the developers to help us build that workforce housing so that our folks do stay here. Because he literally said, "I got more house in Isle of Wight than I could ever get here." So that bothers me. We need those folks here. Anyway, thank you for a great presentation and answering my questions.
Okay, anybody else at this point?
Yes, before you leave, Nikki, I have something to ask you on page 17, where you talk about the economy is stable.
17? Oh, yes.
Yes, where you're mentioning, to kind of expound on a little bit more about the tariff, for example, for people to be aware that we haven't seen the full impact yet. If you
Yes.
can talk a little bit more about that.
So as I mentioned before, the latest inflation rate is around 3%. That's not that far off from where we were even a year ago. We've been hovering around that 2.5%, 3%, not hitting 2% yet. And so that full impact of tariffs, we think, is going to take some time. You also have businesses who are competing against each other. If you're Walmart or your Target, you're going to try to keep prices low because you have competitors. But that can only be sustainable for so long. So we think it's going to take time for those tariffs to fully work their way through to prices. We are seeing some initial impact on the most import-exposed type of goods, so furniture and appliance. You are seeing an increase on those goods, but we haven't seen a broad-based impact on prices yet. And that will take some time. And there's still some question. I mean, this is very new territory. We are at tariff levels that we haven't seen since the 1920s, 30s. So there is some question about how prices overall on the broad range will be affected moving forward.
Okay, so we need to brace ourselves for that. And then you mentioned about the international migration.
Mm-hmm.
What group are you talking about?
So these, when we think of population growth, it's domestic migration, international migration, or the natural change, that birth minus deaths. Natural change has slowly declined over decades now. International migration in Virginia Beach and in Hampton Roads has been the largest contributor. I'm sure many of you know that we have consistently faced net domestic outmigration over time. Right. So when we think about the immigration policies that are happening, a lot of it is focused on illegal immigration, but there is still definitely talk about legal immigration. And so if we do see an overall decline, it will be an outsized impact for our region relative to other areas. It depends on where it's focused, of course, so there is a question, but it is important to consider.
Okay, thank you. And I also wanted to mention about attainable housing. As an example, I'm District 4, and right now we have 180 affordable housing that's going to be coming in right off the Simon Outlet Mall along Burton Station. We also have 345 market rate, but between Councilman Shulman and myself, we're able to get down, convince the developers for a certain percentage to be affordable. And one thing we noticed, they listened to us, they went back to the table and came up with a solution. So sometimes it's a matter of bringing this forward, sitting with them one-on-one, letting them know how important this is for us. Thank you. And then I wanted to ask to do with the schools. I'm a little puzzled on, I know you mentioned about the percentage, 95% of the students?
90, I think it's 96.9 on our graduation rate. It's preliminary right now.
Right. And how does that weigh with what's going on, as you've mentioned, to do with those that are disabled, those, how do they fit into this whole composition? Thank you.
So the overall graduation rate includes all the students that we serve, English language learners, students with disabilities, et cetera.
Oh. Okay, and that is that 96%?
That's the overall percentage rate. Our students with disabilities have, all of our subgroups have a higher graduation rate than the state mean in every
That's
single
excellent.
category.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's why I wanted to just make sure I heard what I heard right. Congratulations to the schools. Thank
Okay,
you.
Melinda?
Thank you so much. Mr. Dehaney, you talked about the housing study that was done. Is that available?
School board member, yes, it is available. If possible, we can send it over to Dr. Robinson and he can share it with the school board. It was done probably in 2024.
Okay,
And
I'm just
then-
curious.
Yep, okay.
And then, thank you so much. And I also wanted to thank you, Mayor, for hosting us here today. It's awesome that we are able to get together. I wanted to make one comment that Vice Mayor Wilson made about our military. I don't know if it's ever been brought up here, but Virginia Beach is one of the cities that military families can come to if they have a student with disabilities. There are very few cities in the country that can service students with disabilities, which then does impact our numbers. But it is important to understand that because we can provide services and we want to maintain our connection to the military and maintain those services for our members, that they can come to us, that's going to increase our numbers and our cost, but it's also going to service the people that are here.
Very well stated, very well stated. Okay, anybody else? Okay, Kathleen, you got any closing statement?
Closing thoughts here. I just want to once again thank everybody for, coming to the table. I think this is great, and I would encourage city council and school board members alike to reach out and make sure that we maintain our relationship with our city council members. We have 86 school buildings. We're working on the Jericho Road now, so we have found some creative solutions, and we continue to work on that, much like you guys have competing needs. We do too, and what's good for our city is good for our schools and vice versa. So I appreciate the partnership and collaboration.
Thank you. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. Collaboration is going to be the key going forward. I think it's going to be obvious that we're going to have a lot of shared challenges and a lot of shared pain together. But I'm pretty sure that every city and municipality in this great nation of yours is going to be having, the same conversation. We're still reeling in a lot of way from the effects of COVID, both in terms of inflation and, certainly impacted education across this great nation. But once again, we can get through it, but we got to get through it together. But the way we get through it, we have to confront the realities. And the reality is that life is very expensive right now. And a matter of fact that we have to confront, that we did a little study, and out of our 97.5 cents, approximately 30 cents of that between our city and schools is unfunded or underfunded mandates. And, kind of Hutch and a few other folks hit on it. We're an aging city, both in terms of infrastructure, and especially folks myself who are at the peak of the silver tsunami that's coming here. All of us baby boomers are, growing on, and they have needs. Our sewers are deteriorating and, need repair. Kathleen mentioned you got 86 school buildings. That's quite a few buildings, and the city owns a number of buildings that need repair. And the thing is, and I think, Hutch, I really appreciate you bringing it up, we're going to have to find new revenue sources to confront the future if we're going to be successful confronting the future. And the way we do that is with collaboration. So, let me just, along the line with Kathleen said, I think we need a new sense of partnership, not only with city and schools, but, with our delegation in Richmond going forward, because they're going to be very proactive in, helping to determine and shape, the future that we're going to be going. And we do that by civility, mutual respect, and, sometimes things we're not seeing these days. But we're different here in Virginia Beach. I really do that. We got a council that gets along. We get along with the school board and everything. And it's the idea is about building those relationships and, putting our personal needs aside and partisanship aside. Let's get together and figure out what we have in common, not what we have dividing us. And let's go ahead and move forward and, show the rest of the folks how we get it done and they can get it done too. So once again, thank you all for coming. And let's plan to get together again.